It was, without a doubt, the largest empire the world has ever seen, a global superpower that lasted for more than 3 centuries. And yet, somehow, within the span of a single lifetime, it pretty much completely vanished. So, how in the world did that happen? Let's dig in. First, let's just try to wrap our heads around the sheer scale we're talking about here. At its absolute peak, back in the 1920s, the British Empire controlled over 1/4 of the entire planet's landmass. Just think about that. That means if you picked any 4 spots on a globe, one of them, on average, would have been under British rule. It's wild. You've probably heard the famous saying, the empire on which the sun never set. And it was literally true. Its territory was so vast, it was always daytime somewhere in the empire. It was this seemingly permanent, unstoppable global force, which, just makes its sudden collapse all the more mind-boggling. So yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? How did this colossal structure, built up over centuries of conquest and trade, just come crumbling down in a few short decades? Okay, so to figure out how it all fell apart, we've got to first understand how it was built and how the whole thing actually worked. What was the point of it all? Well, let's be blunt about it. At its core, the British Empire was an economic machine. It was designed from the ground up to make Britain rich. Simple as that. The whole point was to extract wealth, pull out resources, and use labor from the colonies to benefit the home country. But, and this is important, the empire wasn't just one single thing. It was a really complex system with different flavors of control. You had the dominions, like Canada and Australia, who were pretty much self-governing. Then you had the crown colonies, like Kenya and Hong Kong, which were ruled directly from London. And then there were protectorates, which were somewhere in the middle. It was a very intricate and deliberately managed machine. But here's the thing about that machine. It was built on some seriously shaky and often brutal ground. This idea that everyone was happy until World War II came along? Nah, that's not the real story. Resentment and the deep desire for independence, that was always there, simmering right from the very beginning. You can see this so clearly if you look at World War I. The empire depended on millions of soldiers from its colonies, but it sure didn't treat them as equals. Take a look at this jacket. This was standard issue for the South African Native Labor Corps. The men who wore this were restricted to non-combat roles, basically fetching, carrying, and digging. Why? Because the British government refused to let black soldiers fight white soldiers in Europe. And this is where it gets really jaw-dropping. There's this note from a British censor who is reviewing a German photo of chained black prisoners. But instead of being outraged, he actually wrote that Britain shouldn't make too big a deal about it. His reasoning? Because, and this is a direct quote from his notes, it was likely how British forces themselves would treat native delinquents. It's just a shocking admission that lays bare the racist double standards that were baked right into the system. So with that kind of attitude, it's really no surprise that the empire was almost constantly putting down uprisings. We're talking major resistance movements going way, way back. You had the Sepoy Rebellion in India, the Boer Wars in South Africa, the Irish War of Independence. The idea of a peaceful, stable empire, for the most part, it was a myth, and it was a myth maintained through force. So you've got all these cracks already forming in the foundation. But then comes World War II. And this was the killing blow. This was the event that didn't just weaken the empire, it pretty much guaranteed its collapse. So why was the war so devastating? Well, first off, money. Pure and simple. Britain might have been on the winning side, but the war absolutely wrecked its economy. They were drowning in debt. And suddenly, the idea of paying the enormous cost to police a global empire and fight off independence movements, it just wasn't possible anymore. But it wasn't just about the money. The psychological hit was massive. And the moment it all came crashing down was in 1942, with the fall of Singapore. This was supposed to be Britain's impenetrable fortress in Asia, and it fell to the Japanese. Even Winston Churchill himself called it the greatest capitulation in British history. For the folks back in Britain, it was a total shock, a complete humiliation. The myth of imperial invincibility. That myth died at Singapore. But think about what that looked like for the millions of people living under British rule. Lee Kuan Yew, who would go on to become Singapore's prime minister, put it perfectly. Seeing the British so completely defeated shattered the whole idea of European superiority. The magic trick was revealed, the curtain was pulled back, and you can't put that kind of thing back in the box. All right, so after the war, what do we have? An empire that's flat broke and an empire whose reputation is in tatters. This was the perfect storm for what came next, the Great Unraveling. It was like a dam bursting, and all those decades of resentment came flooding out.
And man, did those dominoes fall fast. It kicked off with the jewel in the crown, India and Pakistan gaining independence in 1947. That just lit a fire across the globe. A wind of change, as the prime minister at the time called it, swept through Africa. And this chain reaction just kept going for decades, all the way to the final symbolic handover of Hong Kong in 1997.
And here's another huge piece of the puzzle. The whole world had changed around Britain. It wasn't just a British world anymore. You now had two new top dogs on the block, the United States and the Soviet Union. And guess what? For their own very different reasons, neither of them were fans of old-school European empires. The US, especially, wasn't about to foot the bill to help Britain keep its colonies. If there was any doubt about who was really in charge now, the Suez Crisis in 1956 erased it completely. When Britain invaded Egypt to try and retake the canal, the US put immense pressure on them to pull out. Britain had to back down, totally humiliated. The message to the rest of the world was crystal clear. Britain was no longer a top-tier superpower. From there, the path was set. The process of decolonization rolled on, sometimes peacefully, other times incredibly violently. But that long story, which started centuries earlier, really came to its symbolic end in 1997, when the British flag came down for the last time in Hong Kong. But of course, an empire that big doesn't just disappear without a trace, right? Its legacy is all around us, woven into the fabric of the modern world. It's in the Commonwealth, it's in the English language we're speaking right now, it's in the borders on our maps, it's even in sports like cricket and rugby. The ghost of the empire is still very much with us. So that leaves us with this really complicated, messy legacy. Was it a civilizing force, or was it an oppressive one? The truth is, it was an engine for incredible wealth, but that engine was fueled by racial hierarchy and brutal violence. It connected the globe, for sure, but it also drew lines on maps that people are still fighting and dying over today. So maybe the final question isn't whether it was good or bad, but how do we even begin to make sense of a history that is so deeply and undeniably both?